Join me today as we look into a yogic understanding of what balance can look like in our daily lives. Hello, and welcome to this week's video. As you may know, this month, all of the videos have been focused on the concept, the yogic concept of prana, or what is known as life force or vital energy. And one of the aspects of prana that I think it's useful to reflect on and to understand is that we can view prana in both a metaphysical capacity, but we can also view prana from a metaphorical standpoint as well. And today I just want to unpack the difference between those two things and how ultimately they are related, but by perhaps seeing them in this way, it helps us to bring out more meaning and therefore more impact in terms of our practice and our daily lives. So metaphysically, prana is regarded to be life force, and it is a life force or an energy that flows through the nadis, or the energy channels that are contained within the body, according to yoga philosophy. And the idea is essentially that this prana, or this life force, can flow freely through these energy channels, both on the left and the right hand side of the body, ultimately over time with practice, bringing balance so that the energy then flows through the central channel, the sushumna nadi, which is essentially the path towards liberation. So the idea that we can balance the prana on the left and right sides of the body and unblock the central channel so that essentially we can find balance and our energy rises. And as a result of that rising energy, we have a clarity and an inward focus that allows us to reach a state of samadhi or absorption, which brings fresh insight and ultimately brings us to a state of mental and physical and emotional balance and equanimity. Now, for some of us, we may find the idea of life force, we may find the idea of nadis or energy channels and chakras. Maybe that's just not something that we gel with, or it's not something that resonates with us, and that's okay. And that's why I always like to introduce the idea of seeing prana and the balance of energy from a metaphorical standpoint, because perhaps that's what it is. Essentially, what the yoga teachings are telling us is that we need to be able to learn how to balance our energies. In the Bhagavad Gita, it talks about action and it talks about inaction. And essentially what we may find ourselves in these days is a state of constant and continual action. We're constantly needing to work through our to-do lists. We're constantly feeling that we need to perhaps please someone else or do things for other people, whether it be in our family, our children, our spouses, other members of family, or in our community at large. And there's a feeling that's engendered very much by the current modern political socio-economic paradigm, which basically preaches to us that unless we are busy all of the time and, in inverted commas, doing something, then we are not necessarily productive or, dare I say it, valuable members of society. And if we're not careful, when we become imbued with this doctrine or this way of seeing things, it causes us to move into a state where we don't actually have a balanced energetic pattern or a sustainable energetic pattern in our bodies and in our minds. Because as I've often said with prana, where the mind goes, the energy flows. And if our minds are constantly moving externally, if they're constantly thinking about things, if they're constantly connected to other people's ideas of what we should and shouldn't be doing in our lives, then the energy flows in that direction. And as a result of that, our energy becomes dissipated, our prana becomes dissipated. And we can see this to be true in our own lives. Whenever we give ourselves to something fully and completely that's external to ourselves, if we're not careful, and if we don't understand the signs of what show us that we are moving towards imbalance, then we move towards an imbalanced state. One of the great gifts of yoga, particularly asana practice, is that it allows us to move into connection with the sensations in our body, and we can begin to understand them at more and more subtle levels, to the point that eventually we begin to notice the sensory patterns that are related to stress, that are related to expending way too much energy, and therefore that can guide us towards knowing that at that moment there is perhaps an alternate route that we might need to take in order to find balance. That is to say that balancing action with rest, balancing the need to do things with the need to be still, and understanding that that is so important in our day-to-day lives if we want to have a sustainable life, both at the physiological and health level, but also at the psychological and at the emotional level too. And of course, as yoga tells us, without those things in balance, we will never be able to see deeper than them, and therefore we will continue to neglect or not understand our true nature as pure, stable awareness. The other thing that I think is important to say when we think about balancing prana is that balance looks different to different people. And in someone's life, balance can be one thing, and in another person's life, balance can be something else based on what they have to deal with in their own life, in their own household, in their own setup. But equally as important as that is to understand that actually balance may on one particular day look like one thing, but then when the circumstances of our lives change, balance can equally look like something else. The example I've been giving recently is that prior to the arrival of our now 3.5-year-old daughter, I used to practice yoga and meditation and pranayama for many, many hours every day for a relatively long period of time. Of course, when my daughter arrived, it was simply not feasible for me to do that. One, because of the logistical lifting of being present for a baby, number one. But also two, because I simply didn't have the same energy levels or concentration or focus to devote to my practice in the same way. Now, if I hadn't have been sensitive to the energetic changes within and around me, I may have erroneously tried to continue pushing to do lengthy practices, the result of which would have been that not only would I have become more and more physically fatigued, but also I wouldn't have been honouring my responsibilities within this new family setup, which would have caused therefore relationship and emotional issues around me as well. So balance is number one, beginning to understand what we need in the form of action and rest and nourishment, when we need to take pauses, when is actually a time to act, when is a time not to act, and understanding that in our own nature and in our own setup. But also it's having the sensitivity to understand when our prana, when our life force is being depleted, or for example, when circumstances in our lives have changed and when we need to find balance in a new way. The final thing I'd like to say about that is that finding balance in a day-to-day life when we have family, relationships, jobs and so forth and other responsibilities really does take quite a lot of courage, because society imposes a certain way of being onto all people that is regarded as the expected norm for how we are supposed to behave. And it can create internally a lot of guilt that when we flow against the stream of the common discourse, that somehow we are not doing the right thing and that somehow we are abandoning our responsibilities. So when I talk about courage to find our balance, it means that we really have to listen internally to understand what is right for ourselves, and of course in a compassionate way that still fits in with the responsibilities that we have in our lives. We have to gradually allow ourselves to communicate to the people around us what balance looks like for us and how we can achieve our own balance, even in the context of these broader webs of relationship. Ultimately, my understanding so far on this journey is that to balance prana is to balance our responsibilities in our lives and the actions in our lives with the need for rest, for nourishment, taking space, taking time alone where necessary, and learning how to say no and create boundaries in a compassionate way in order to preserve our life force and to ensure that it doesn't become vitiated. As a result of that, what I notice gradually, slowly, day by day, is that I'm able to serve the things around me. I say the things, the people around me. I'm able to serve students, I'm able to serve my wife, my daughter, and so forth in a much more balanced way. Now, that doesn't mean I get it right all the time. Of course it doesn't. But more often than not, it allows me to sit in a space where I have the right amount of energy in my body, where I don't feel completely fatigued or depleted of energy, so that I can make the right compassionate decisions and actions in each and every moment. At least that is the practice, and that is how it unfolds day after day. So I just thought it might be useful to talk about prana in this way, that yes, there is a metaphysical aspect to it in terms of how it flows around the body and the need to bring balance, but also metaphorically as an idea that if we can balance our prana, if we can hold the prana within our body, that is a sign that we are bringing in a focus and in a balance, and that allows us to serve ourselves and all those around us in a far more sustainable and meaningful and compassionate way. So as always, I hope you found this video useful today, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thank you.